Good friend in from Israel, Rabbi Yitzchok Adlerstein is with us.
Great to be here, Glenn.
How are you?
I'm doing good, as well as you can do in the middle of a war. I got to tell you, the power that you have, I'm just overwhelmed by it. I was eating breakfast meeting, call for an Uber, get into the car, and I hear his voice. And I look at and it says Mercury, and I tell my lovely driver, Deidre, I said, "Are you listening to Mercury?" She says, "Yeah, my daughter got me into it a couple of years ago." They said, "You know where we're going?"
Yeah, so great, so great.
So I don't know.
Texas is a blessed place. How are things in Israel?
You know, it's a mixture. It's a war. There's no question. I feel a little guilty because my family. My wife and myself and 2 kids live in the Jerusalem area, where we haven't had to run for a bomb shelter in a couple of weeks. People are amazing. The feeling of unity in the in is just. It was
like that on 9/11 for us.
It was like that in 9/11. Mm-hmm. I do think it's something a little different here. It's not just a question of survival. It's people finding their commonality. It's a commonality that is deeper than just this horrible, horrible enemy that we have to defeat. It's the sense of mission, of purpose, of having been in this land for 3,000 years, have come back to it, started this wonderful, wonderful state. We got more than 50% of the country who are volunteering to help soldiers, displaced people. People are making meals.
So
every time, God forbid, another soldier dies, there are literally thousands of people, thousands of strangers who come to a funeral. It's exhilarating, and it makes me feel a little bad. I think I remember when I was a kid, there was somewhat of this feeling in America, and it's dissipated for so long.
I know. Hopefully it comes back, and hopefully it doesn't take a national tragedy to do it. There's video that is out. Palestinian strip forced to sit outside by IDF soldiers raises ire. How do you respond to that?
My stomach responds first. After I can get control of that, what are people saying? You're talking about an army that invaded Israel, that was a perpetrator of the worst savagery that we have seen since World War II. Certainly the worst that Jews have experienced. I was in Knesset about a week ago, and just after showing to members of Knesset of some of the footage that hasn't been shown to the general public, nobody made it through the entire showing. Everybody. Some people made it closer to the end. One woman collapsed. There were doctors waiting outside. You're talking about things that we don't even want to talk about. And if you see the visuals, you're changed. You change for life. When you then surround some of their soldiers, people who are pledged, who've said October 7th is just the beginning.
I know.
It's the first of a set. There's going to be bigger and better coming. And there's no way that you're going to suppress us. And people are upset when you show a visual of soldiers who should be happy that they're alive, and are there because security demanded that you make sure that they're not hiding any arms. You know what's scariest about that, Glenn, is the extent to which people's minds are affected by visuals without any thought about principles.
It is truly terrifying here in America to see. I mean, I knew it was going to get bad. I've talked about it for years. But to see how rapidly so many people have gone off the cliff of reality is a little terrifying. You see what happened last week with the heads of Penn and Harvard and MIT. I don't even understand how people are justifying this at all. Do you?
I'm afraid that I do. Look, there are a number of components of this. Two of them we can get through very quickly. The other one you're going to find more interesting.
Okay.
One is that anti-Semitism never, ever really goes away.
Correct.
It's there. I've worked in the field of watching anti-Semitism now for decades. And the worst kind of anti-Semitism, as far as Jewish survival, is unconscious anti-Semitism. People who would be shocked to hear, what, am I an anti-Semite? But yet harbor subconscious feelings about the Jewish people. It's the only way to understand why there's so many people who are upset. And people should be upset watching people die and watching casualties, although we don't know how many there are. But what happened a couple of years ago in Syria? When Assad killed between 500 to 600,000 people. By the way, almost every one of those deaths could have been avoided had America stood its ground rather than painting lines in the sand that they never followed. 13 million people displaced. If you ask people in America, where's the bloodiest conflict in recent decades? Where more people dying than any place on Earth. And I'm telling you, 11 out of 10
say Israel.
Will tell you, will not get this right. Math was not my strong point. 11 out of 10 will tell you, I don't know, but they won't get the real one, which is the Congo. War that's been going on for decades with hundreds of thousands of casualties, orders of magnitude more than Israel-Palestine.
So
where's the outrage? So that's part of it. Another part of it is the introduction of a Middle Eastern anti-Semitism that's a product of immigration. That's going to change the demography of America. It's already changed the voting habits of the Democratic Party. But then there's the part that you should really get scared about, Glenn, and that is that Liz McGill, the one whose testimony was the most damning in Congress, it depends on context. What was she doing? That was your question. What she was really doing was pandering to the expectations of faculty and students on campus. And that has been heading in one direction for decades.
It is, if you don't understand it, it is why Bob Iger being replaced at Disney will make no difference, because the culture is so deep, it's all the way down the food chain. It's in all of the employees. So replacing the top won't change a darn thing.
Right. And I know I'm not going to get paid more for this interview by buttering you up, because none of us get paid anything. But that's one of the reasons why you are sitting in such an important position, why the only way that this can be arrested, or at least contained in part, is if people recognize the depth of the problem and say we're going to take the appropriate measures. I don't mean anything, God forbid, militarily. I mean in education in particular. There are just too many parents out there who say, this is horrible, this intersectionality stuff and the wokeism, whatever. But as far as their own kids and the schooling they're giving their own kids, they're, okay, we really were going to send our kids to a Christian school, but, we just moved and the public school is only half a mile away.
Right.
And we're going to do it, and thinking that somehow you're not going to have to bear those consequences. If you're serious about the centrality of the family, if you're serious about Christian values, then you have to realize that the most sacred mission that God gave to you is to make sure that your children are servants of God who interested in the truth, and people are just not able to emerge that way when they're glued to their devices 26 hours a day and then indoctrinated in public schools and certainly in the universities.
Right. Let me ask you, because you said a year ago, and you said to me several years ago as well, they're coming for Christians first this time. I think we're not in lockstep, but it's getting worse for the Jews faster than it is for the Christians. But you were right all those years ago. Christians are unaware of what is happening to them, and what is right around the corner. I mean, if you're surprised at how many people are saying, I'm anti-Semitic things. I'm against the Jews or whatever. That's it's not a huge leap in this society now to say, yeah, well, I'm also against those Christians too, because the Christians cause all the problems.
Especially since one of the dominant themes in the culture of America today is the takeover by thoughts of intersectionality and wokeism and the idea that you can divide the world into two halves, the oppressed and the oppressors. And the good guys are the oppressed and the bad guys are the oppressors. There was a display in a hall at Indiana University, Purdue, for almost an entire year, not in a classroom, in a hallway, that sought to alert students about how Christianity was part of white privilege and therefore made Christians as Christians part of the oppressor class, how Christianity was used as a vehicle of oppression. You may be right that I was wrong about coming for Christians first, although they did in places like Nigeria and a whole, but October 7th unleashed something that was powerful. Right. But you're not a step behind. You may be a quarter of a step behind. Michigan State University had a code of speech for students. It has been revoked since then, but it was in force for, I believe, an entire academic year, where students were told to avoid any language that made oblique reference to the majority religion in America. So you were not supposed to use words like Mary or jingle bells or eggs or and it stressed majority religion. You're allowed to talk about minority religions, I guess, as long as it's not Jewish, but you can't talk about Christianity.
The key here to understand all of this is oppressor versus oppressed. If everything else goes, all logic, everything goes out the window, all facts go out the window. If you just look at oppressor versus oppressed,